So I'm going to talk about some of the different security things that are a concern to ISPs and larger networks like enterprise networks and that sort of thing. The slides are actually available online. So if you're following on Ustream, you can check out the slides online. They're HTML5 slides. You just press the left and right hand keys on your keyboard and you're good to go. So who I am. So if you don't know me, my name is Theo Baschak. I currently work at VoIP Network Solutions. We're donating the internet for the streaming and whatnot for this conference. We're a commercial internet provider and carrier in the city. I'm also an avid open source user, fanatic, and recently somewhat of a contributor. Not a huge amount yet, but you got to start somewhere, right? I'm also involved with both the internet exchanges in Winnipeg. I'm an elected member on the board of directors for the Manitoba Internet Exchange, and I'm involved with the creation and the technical operations of the Winnipeg Internet Exchange as well. Some of the different projects I've done, just in case you don't know me. Before I lived in Winnipeg, I lived in the PA, and kind of the major ISP that was there was called Jeans Telecom, and at the time they only had a satellite uplink. A couple years later, they finally upgraded to some MTS leased lines, and then most recently they've upgraded their connection to be through Manitoba NetSet's Ethernet network. I used to run WPGWiFi.com, like however many years ago. I think it was in the paper or something like that. We used to work at another ISP called Broadband Communications North. I was there from the very beginning, from when it was at the proposal stage, all the way through the second generation of network upgrades. Most recently, there was a network-wide upgrade from a mixed vendor to a single vendor core at VoIP Networks. So, overview of some of the things I'm going to talk about. First of all, you have to know your network. If you don't really know your network, you're going in totally blind. I'm going to talk about some of the problems that affect ISPs and large enterprise networks, and also some of the best current practices which offer some solutions, although most of the solutions require absolutely everyone being on board, so it's not necessarily the best solutions yet. So knowing your network, there's many very nice open source software tools in this area. There's also some proprietary ones that have just that extra polish, maybe a nicer interface or a smoother transition in between various aspects of the tool. In terms of discovery tools, some of the really easy ones are Nmap. The Metasploit framework is pretty nice, and Showdown HQ is kind of like an Nmap web service, really. For $20, you can get access to run nat : commands, so you can scan your own network without having to intrusively scan. In terms of knowing your network, it also helps to know what's going on. In terms of if things are up or not, if there's bandwidth, spikes or not. Bandwidth spikes might be a result of a DOS attack, or maybe just a customer's torrenting something too. You never know, but if you don't investigate it, you'll never know. There's also nice tools for trending graphic graphs. Observium is kind of a nice new one. Logging. If you don't log things, you don't have anything to go back on after an event happens, and it makes investigating things really difficult. Pretty much every network device out there supports syslog of some sort. If you collect all those syslogs and correlate them all using a tool like Logstash or Splunk or something like that, you can correlate different events and find out exactly what happened. And of course, documentation. If you don't know who's using what IP address and where they're routed to, and even what the purpose of those IP addresses is, you're going in really blind. So some of the discovery things, there's a lot of DDoS attacks now that involve abusable services. Things like open recursive DNS servers, SNMP services with really simple passwords, etc. So it helps to know if there are abusable services like that on your network, because if you don't know, someone else already does. An example of how to scan for that, for DNS and SNMP, is this nmap command here. Metasploit can be a little bit more useful when you're looking for SNMP discovery, just because it has bigger dictionaries and ways of piping commands from nmap existing things into there, so you can save yourself some time. Show at NHQ is also pretty handy, but it might not necessarily be up to date, and you might have already blocked their nmap crawlers, due to excessive scanning already. There's a lot of the UDP small services which get enabled. People kind of poking around in Windows, oh, what do these things here do? Enable all these small services, and suddenly you've got all these nice abusable UDP services which you can misdirect traffic at and have them fire back at anyone you want. Monitoring tools. On an ISP network or a large network, you need to have more than just up and down. If you just have up and down, then you're scrambling to find out what actually happened. It helps to have alerting for things like high bandwidth usage on trunk links or external links or even internal links. Packet loss to different parts of your network. High CPU usage. High CPU usage can be, as a result of something being abused, or high bandwidth again, or those sorts of things. High numbers of SMTP messages. This is a really important one these days. No one likes getting spam, but there's millions and millions and millions of spam drones out there because people just don't monitor these things. Another important one would be if BGP sessions get dropped. You definitely want to know that happened and investigate why. There's been lots of different graphing suites in terms of interface traffic over the years. MRTG, kind of like the original one. Cacti has replaced it, really, in my mind. It does a whole bunch more things, and now I think even Observium has probably replaced that. But there's lots of different open source graphing suites. They all provide different features. There's lots of variety there. You don't have to necessarily stick with one for absolutely everything either. And monitoring does absolutely nothing if you don't act upon it. If you get alerted about things and you just ignore them, was it a problem? Was it not a problem? Who knows? There's a lot of inaction in the ISP world, unfortunately. Logging. Large volumes of logs can be a huge pain. If you collect them all and you want to just grep through them, that's fine. But you'll quickly find that grep is only so useful, and you end up piping a million things through another million things. And there are tools that help with dealing with large volumes of logs, and you can correlate a whole pile of different things together. Things from maybe high hits on a database server at the same time as high hits on a web server over here, and high interface usage over here, maybe high VM usage over here, and once you correlate all these things, then you have a really nice picture. Reviewing logs, you have to review them. You have to go through them and look what happened. If you don't, there's always things happening behind your back that just happen. Automated attacks, hundreds and hundreds of SSH attempts overnight, or that sort of thing. Troubleshooting is also really handy when you have these logs, especially from the network equipment side, because they all log when they lose adjacency to their neighbor and that sort of thing, so you can quickly track well, something happened here and it flowed out from here this direction, or maybe a high CPU usage situation happened over here and it caused routing effects that affected here, here, and here, but not out here. So it really helps to have the logs when you're going to troubleshoot these things. Documentation also, it has to be accurate. If you have inaccurate information and you're troubleshooting something, you can spend hours worth of time going in absolutely the wrong direction, and it's really frustrating. It's got to be up to date, again. It has to be available. It helps absolutely no one to have really nice documentation and have it unavailable because it's only available on a LAN or something like that, and you happen to be at the coffee shop or somewhere else. On the same thread, it has to be available in a format which works. If you only have it in the Microsoft Word format, that doesn't help you necessarily if you're getting that on your phone, or you only have an SSH session or something like that. The information needs to be available in a format which will be useful in an emergency, and often I find that is a text-based format, like a text or markdown or something like that, where it can be converted to something else too. And it has to be easy to understand. If you're confused by the documentation when you're troubleshooting an emergency, you might end up making the situation much, much, much worse. So some of the problems that can happen. There's many, many, many common problems that affect ISPs and other large corporate and enterprise networks. To make the situation better, we have to all acknowledge problems and resolve reported problems to make the situation better. I guess I should probably edit the double situation better there. Luckily, there's a lot of tools available to make this process easier, especially on the open source side. There are some really, really nice issue tracking softwares which are compliant with various sorts of things like ITIL, if that sort of thing cranks your turkey. Some of the specific ISP-related problems. In 2011, there was a worm which came out just before Christmas, just in that, maybe we'll get a couple days to relax period, which actually exploited a misconfiguration in a very common ISP product, Ubiquity products, and it was exploitable, and there was actually a botnet resulted out of that. I think they said that there was like 600,000 compromised subscriber units for ISPs that were in this network. So that's pretty significant. And depending on how the traffic shaping happens on those things, they might have been outside of the subscribers' packages too. So it's a potential for a huge amount of bandwidth there. BCP38 filtering. This is a huge one. BCP38 basically says that if you assign an IP range to a customer, that's the only IP range that they should be able to send from. They shouldn't be able to spoof traffic from anywhere else. Kind of makes sense, but it's not very widely implemented. Another huge one is open DNS servers. This one here has become a huge issue recently with DDoS attacks based on reflections from, again, spoof traffic to DNS servers. Like 400 and some unmonitored DNS servers can easily result in over a gigabit of traffic, easily. Another huge one is open SNMP servers. On some of the North American network operator lists, they're talking about the largest DDoS attacks that they've ever seen, and everyone's really hush-hush about it because no one wants to talk about it, but some of the information out there says that the largest ones have actually been from unconfigured or unrestricted SNMP servers, where people will walk them from a false source, and now you get the device spewing out absolutely everything it knows about itself to a destination which didn't request it. SMTP and spam issues are a huge one. No one likes getting spam, but as soon as you get public IPs or machines which get infected and don't have any SMTP restrictions, you quickly end up with machines getting on blacklists and that sort of thing. Automated attacks is another huge one. At VOI, we see hundreds and hundreds of attempts to our various devices, which obviously don't get there, but, I wish I had a graph of this one, actually. Basically, it's like China is this huge chunk, and then everything else is usually about another third of it is the US, and then various countries after that. A really, really, really important one is BGP leaks and BGP hijacking. And this one here can have absolutely drastic consequences if you have a particular IP address of yours get hijacked, especially if you're not using them. So the ubiquity worm. So on December 19, so just before Christmas in 2011, a botnet installing worm became very public. There's some links to it here, which I've dug up after the fact. And the worm targeted the widely popular Ubiquity ISP platform with a huge range of versions and downloaded the botnet client onto the permanent storage on the affected devices. So there was, it was basically a command about this long which it executed and instantly infected permanent storage. Every time you reboot it, it's back. Even across upgrades, there was one of the upgrades actually had to run a specific command to check for those files to remove them just in case. Spoof traffic and the UDP services. The lack of edge or the source address filtering at the edge of most networks aids spoofing attacks. Lots and lots of networks don't check for this at all. There's many DNS servers which can be abused, and devices with default credentials which can be probed with spoof credentials also cause DDoS attacks as well. And a lot of routers don't track these SNMP connections in their connection tables. So when you go to report them to people, they're like, nope, that's not us, it's obviously somewhere else. Which makes it really difficult to get any action taken on them. Automated attacks, FTP scans, SSH scans, SMTP credential scans, RDP scans, skip scans. Les talked about those ones yesterday. Depending on the scale of the device and the intended load, you can get some noticeable CPU strain if you're monitoring for these things. Or you might end up getting reports of other things being slow as a result of, and then you end up investigating it, and this was the root cause. Unmonitored logging in this sense can actually be a DOS attack on yourself. I know someone who pen tested an FTP server one time, and after a week of scanning it, they ran out of space on the C drive. So they finally noticed it. In terms of automated attacks, it really helps to be aware of potential destinations for new attacks on your network. If you know that your network doesn't have servers and all of a sudden SMTP servers show up on it, that's kind of a bad sign. Maybe something else popped up and installed one. If you know that you have SIP servers, you need to protect them in an appropriate sort of way. There are all sorts of packages which you can run on individual host systems to detect brute force attacks, and there's also proactive security appliances which you can put in front of devices as well, which will do that too. And proactive security policies can protect your network. So if you know that you're not going to necessarily have any servers running in a network, in a particular part of your network, then maybe you should put a firewall in front of that and just not allow direct connections in. That sort of thing. Some of the significant BGP events which have occurred over the last couple of years, which are pretty interesting. In 2008, YouTube went down for a couple hours to, most of a day, depending on who you were connected to. And the reason that this happened was that an ISP in Pakistan had internally routed that /24, which contained the YouTube servers on it, to a different location so that they could display a message that said, hey, you know, we don't want you viewing this content. And they were filtering their BGP upstream, so this quickly went global. And YouTube at the time, which wasn't Google at the time, had a /22 advertised, so the /24 was more specific, and the entire internet's YouTube traffic started going over there for a while. In 2012, Bell and Tata Communications had a leak. This was mostly noticed as a Facebook outage by a lot of Canadians, but it did affect some other things as well, too. Bell apparently wasn't filtering one of their small customers, and the customer leaked a second provider's routes to Bell, and suddenly Bell had a full internet table instead of their usual number of routes. And so they started sinkholing basically a lot of Canadian traffic. There was also a huge DDoS attack on Spamhaus in 2013, and this was also combined with specific /32 BGP leaks. So people who weren't filtering their inbound BGPs to only allow networks between a /8 and a /24, and accepted even the /32s, were suddenly accepting that traffic or accepting that destination and sending their Spamhaus DNS request to there. And this DNS server chose to respond back with that everything was allowed. So some people were affected that, other people weren't, but that was a combined attack as combined with the DDoS attack, the 300 gigabit one, or so-called, I don't know. People have been discussing how large it actually was. The Pirate Bay moves to North Korea. This is kind of a hilarious one. As proof that the Pirate Bay knows the internet better than the authorities who are chasing them, they hijacked 2 North Korean networks and injected them into a satellite session in Cambodia. And through some special TCP stuff, they made their trace routes appear much, much, much longer than they actually were. So the website responded within the usual 40 milliseconds or so. But if you did a trace route, you know, it would hit, I can't remember if it was Sweden or Germany or Switzerland or somewhere in there. And then it just continued. And they actually made it crisscross the world like 2 or 3 times before it hit North Korea. It was just ridiculous how long it was. But they know the internet, right? Some of the best current practices. So the thing about the internet is that there's very few hard rules. The RFCs aren't rules. You know, if people choose not to obey them, things might work, things might not work. They might end up working a little goofy. You know, how do you want to interoperate in this network of networks? Do you want to be a player in this? Do you want to be shunned by other networks? Like there are certain hosting providers which don't care about spam, and so they have a huge reputation behind them as that now too. And when people get ticked off enough, they start blocking larger and larger blocks, and it starts to affect more and more people. The RFCs, and there's a specific subsection of the RFCs dedicated to best current practices, provide guidance in this area. And the spirit of cooperation is what has developed and carried the internet this far, and it's kind of expected that everyone will continue to participate for the greater good. If that doesn't happen, things may fall apart. I think we've already witnessed the beginning of that with the overbearing surveillance in the States. People feel very betrayed, very betrayed. BGP filtering. Misconfigurations can have global consequences. As with the YouTube, the Pakistan YouTube thing, you know, internally routing something which someone else has and letting that escape, everyone in the world might notice within minutes. The internet largely runs on trust, and that trust is very easily abused. In the case of the Pirate Bay, they probably just wrote a fake letter of authorization to get that prefix advertised. Most times people don't check it. It's a paper thing, right? It's not hard to forge all that. Who's even going to check a signature on it? So with BGP filtering, you should always filter your customers. And you should filter them not only on their networks, but their AS path as well. Again, specifically with the Pirate Bay thing, they advertised some of their own network, but then they advertised some hijacked networks as well from North Korea. So under the North Korean AS as well. AS path should always begin with the customer's AS to prevent relearning internet-learned routes. So if you have a customer, but they've turned off the connection to you, and you're now learning that route, say, through MTS, through Shaw, through someone else, you shouldn't re-advertise that because that's not the closest route. But simple, just network filters will allow that to happen. And Cisco has a nice regular expression syntax for that. So you can just put the hat symbol and then the AS and then the $ at the end, and you're good to go all the time. So it's a nice simple one. There's no reason to not use it. Edge ACLs. ACLs on your edge routers can block unknown devices in your network from becoming abusable services. Things like SMTP, DNS, SNMP. Maybe you have sub-networks within you. They're in different departments, and it's difficult to make people do things. So if SNMP is getting abused on a device or DNS is getting abused on a device, maybe you as the person who's got the control on the edge network say, well, I'm sick of dealing with these complaints. I'm just blocking access inbound to that port. BGP and multiple upstreams and a stateful firewall device all on the same device can be trouble. Unfortunately, the thing about BGP is that you're not guaranteed to have symmetrical routing. So something might come in one provider. Maybe let's lay out a situation here. So maybe you've got a gigabit connection to one provider and a 100 megabit backup connection. And someone prefers the backup connection, but you're preferring everything to go out the larger connection. So now, if you're running a stateful firewall and you're sending traffic out that way, and they're sending traffic in the other way, your stateful firewall is like, well, no, you can't do this. And it starts dropping packets and creating major issues. And it's not uncommon to have asymmetrical routing with BGP. It's just the way it works. You pick how you want to send your traffic, and you send it that way. And the people on the other end do exactly the same thing. If they have two connections, and one connection costs them a ton, and one connection doesn't cost them very much, they're probably going to prefer that. And if you do all your traffic engineering, and they do theirs, it is how it is. And you really can't control how that works in the end. Firewalls just inside the edge are also popular with enterprise networks. It's a good design, but not on the actual BGP connection, because you're going to have issues. Communication with other ISPs. This is a big one. So inevitably, there will be abuse, there will be hacking, there will be DOS attacks, there will be DDoS attacks from your network to other networks, and from other networks to your network. And some people are really good about sending out notifications, and some people don't care. And some people send out notifications, and then they follow up and follow up and follow up, and other people send out notifications and don't follow up ever. The most annoying thing to me is when someone sends you a notification, and then you go to spend the time to craft a response to say, hey, I've dealt with this, send it back, and so they were all gung-ho on sending out the notifications, but they can't be bothered to even acknowledge receiving, hey, I fixed this one. So you've got to track all these things. And a lot of times they just end up going into dev null. Like, people just don't care. When you've been doing it for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years of spam abuse, and the situation just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse, there are lots of huge networks out there that just completely ignore you. Both on, after they've sent you abuse reports or when you send them abuse reports. So often you just have to end up just blocking that particular IP or something like that. Yeah, so that's pretty much the end. I got my slides available online. If anyone wanted to check them out after the fact, I apparently have to make an edit or two. If anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Oh.
Change all the documentation, change all the IP addresses, because the network would drop off the internet every couple of weeks. People typing in the example from the book absolutely exactly without changing it.
Yeah. There's actually a documentation subnet now. It's 192.0.2.0/24, and that's supposed to... Yeah, no, it wasn't there always, but there are documentation subnets now, both in IPv4 and IPv6, for that reason. And you probably should use them if you're going to write something, because chances are someone's just going to copy and paste it.
What are your thoughts around like synchrolling bot command and control at the ISP level and things like that?
Well, given the... What's that? Sure. So the question was, what do I think about sinkholing command or CNC servers for botnet and whatnot at the ISP level? I think that we all have to cooperate on these things, and so as ISPs, yes, we most definitely have to proactively participate in this type of stuff, because it's not useful traffic. It's not like we're blocking someone from using the internet or whatever. It's blocking someone from denying someone else the internet, or maybe stealing their money or something like that. Like, it's not, in terms of doing good for the internet, it's not doing a disservice to participate and in aid with that sort of thing.
The problem is you have to be really careful on how you do it.
Yep.
Because you can have a lot, depending upon your methodology, you can get a lot of collateral damage.
Yep. Especially with like...
Things like IP filtering, you can end up taking down a lot of legitimate traffic if you're blocking just on IP. You have to
Yeah.
get off a better resolution than that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have to make sure, like, for certainty before you do things, because there's consequences, especially in the case of, shared virtual hosts where maybe there's hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of websites on one single IP address. And if you just block by IP address...
The best example is the FBI takedown, where they took down that one server back in, what was it, New York or whatever it is, and they took down, they just unplugged the entire cabinet, and all of those additional servers, the legitimate servers and services were all hit collateral.
Yeah. Any other questions? No, it's more of a, if you don't do something about it, and they don't do something about it, and no one does something about it, it's not going to get any better. So, like, it's pretty much a courtesy, but you're kind of screwed either way.
What about communication on MPA, RIA across borders? How's that going to be dealt with, especially internationally?
Well, the funny thing about that is that most of the notification letters that I get at Voi Networks about piracy are PGP signed by a key that I can't find anywhere. Absolutely anywhere. I've tried searching like every single key server, and this key doesn't exist. So I don't really know how I can verify that. So I'm not going to take action based on something I can't verify. Like, I've checked hundreds, like, you know, I've scripted while blah, 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 pipe in lists, etc. Can't find this key. Just doesn't exist. Any of them, actually, like 2 or 3 major ones that I get, they just don't exist on the key servers. So I don't know, maybe someone missed like kind of a critical step when they were learning about PGP at those companies, but yeah. That's it. All right.